Hey, Shalom, did you know that the ancient slave traders, the original ones, they moved over 20 million blacks and other races all through Europe, even white women were slave traders from the Muslim countries? They were the Muslims. That's what we're going to be talking about today in our Did You Know? Because in this week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim. Now, the Torah Portion Mishpatim deals with all the rights of the persons who are living in Israel after they get the commandments of the Lord and they have the equitable laws given to us on Mount Sinai. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to give you a little bit of a history about the Muslims as slave traders and how they moved great quantities of people all through the Western world and Europe. Okay, not to disregard the fact that white Europeans was equally guilty by buying slaves from them. But let's focus on the aspect of unrighteousness, injustice from the Muslim religion compared to the righteousness and equity of the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So let's go right to some of the information we have, okay? Do not believe anything I say. Verify everything we say. Now, as we look at the history, then we will know that in the ancient world, there we go right here. Let me go find up. Sorry, let me go. There it is. Okay, if we go back, the number of people enslaved. According to the particular resource, it says the number of people enslaved by Muslims have been a highly debated topic, especially when the millions of Africans forced from their homelands are considered. Some historians estimate that between AD 650 and 1900s, wow, that's a lot of years, 10 to 10 million people were enslaved by Arab slave traders. Man, they haven't changed much. Remember in the ancient world that we have the sons of the Ishmaelites selling or dealing with, what's his name, Joseph into slavery. Remember that? Now, let's go back to this again. Okay, so Dr. John Allenbilla Asuma, his 2001 book, The Legacy of the Arab Islam in Africa, estimates that over 80 million blacks have more than died en route. That's amazing, the injustice that you have in this. Now, Arab slavers practiced genetic warfare. The Arab slave trade typically dealt in the sale of castrated males, slaves. Black boys between the age of 8 to 12 had their scrotums and the genitalia completely amputated to prevent them from reproducing. About 6 of every 10 boys bled to death during the procedure, according to some source. But the high price brought by eunuchs on the market made the practice profitable. Some men were castrated to be eunuchs in domestic service, and the practice of neutering male slaves was not limited only to black males. The Khalifa in Baghdad at the beginning of the 10th century had 7,000 black eunuchs and 4,000 white eunuchs in his palace. Right, the author Ronald Siegel in 2002. So this is something that needs to be examined. Now, I'm reading this because I think it is important that we compare the unrighteousness of the Muslims compared to the righteousness of our king. Right over here, let me take you to this one. It says, the Eastern Arab slave trade dealt primarily with African women maintaining a ratio of 2 women for each man. These women and young girls were used by Arabs and other Asians as concubines and menials. As Muslim slaveholders were entitled by law to the sexual enjoyment of his slave women. Filling the harems and wealthy Arabs, African women bore them and host them children. This abuse of African women will continue for nearly 1,200 years. I want to continue a few more. I think this is important. Now, and it says, the Arab slave trade in the 19th century was economically tied to the European trade of Africans. New opportunities of exploitation were provided by the transatlantic slave trade, and this sent Arab slavers into overdrive. Now, the Portuguese on the Swahili coast profited directly and were responsible for a boom in the Arab trade. Meanwhile, in the West African coast, the Portuguese found Muslim merchants entrenched along the African coast as far as the Bean of Benin. These European enslavers found they could make considerable amount of gold transporting enslaved Africans from one trading post to another along the Atlantic coast. Now, this is important right here, and I'll stop with this and I'll go into the biblical evidence that we got going on. The Zen rebellion took place near the city of Basra, located in present-day southern Iraq. Over a period of 15 years, from 869 to 883, the insurrection is believed to have involved enslaved African Sand who had originally been captured from the African Great Lakes region and areas further south in East Africa. Basran landowners have brought several thousands of East African Sanji people into southern Iraq to drain the salt marshes in the east. The landowners forced the Sanji, who generally spoke no Arabic, into heavy slave labor and provided them with only minimal substance. The harsh treatment sparked an uprising that grew to involve over 500,000 enslaved and free men who were imported from across the entire empire. Now, let's go to Scripture. In Scripture, when we read in Exodus chapters 21, it says, when you buy a Hebrew servant, says here slave, different translations read differently, should be servant, he shall serve 6 years, but in the 7th year she shall go out free person without debt. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what this is all about. So let me go back here again so I can see you and you can see me. All right. Now, what is this all about? Why am I comparing the slave trade from the Muslims? Those people are oppressing all of those African people and other Semitic countries and other Semitic languages and even women and white women and everything. They didn't have any restrictions on who. Okay, just the vast amount of people in Africa, they took advantage of those people, of the African people. But in the Torah, we see that the command, they come out of Egypt, they are oppressed, they are slaves, they have no rights, they are the lowest caste in Egypt, and now they come and they gain their freedom, they go to Mount Sinai, they receive the Torah, they receive the commandments in a casuistic perspective. Okay, so what is casuistic? Let's go back to the screen so you see what I mean. The casuistic is about, let me explain it to you. What is casuistic? It's a law of a form of legal statements based on if-then structure. What it is characterized by an if-then clause, which is based on the idea of cause and effect. If the Israelite law codes, case law assumes the equality of all citizens, and thus punishment for crime are not hindered or magnified by class or wealth. This is not the case, however, in ancient Mesopotamia, where in Hammurabi's code, right, 170-50 before the Common Era, different degrees of punishments, from fines to execution, were prescribed for slaves, citizens, and members of a nobility. Okay? So what we have here is that the Torah is giving you a complete different perspective of how the ancient world run their governments, with making a distinction between rich, middle, and low class, a caste system, versus the Torah and the equity of the kingdom. Everybody pay half a shekel. Everybody received the same amount of measurement for the manna. Everybody received the same punishment. No matter what, you're an adulterer, whether you're rich or you're poor. If you commit adultery, that's premeditated, you're dead. Okay? That's the way it was done in Scripture. Why? Because of the inequality in the ancient world. Yahweh wants to let you know that you need to respect each other's properties, you need to respect each other's covenants, and you have to treat each other with equity. It also goes along with Hebrew servants. So let's read from the text. In Deuteronomy chapters 20, Exodus chapters 21 says, now these are the judgments, Mishpatim, where you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th year he shall go out free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife and has been born him sons and daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the doors to the door of the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. But notice that this particular situation here is willingly. Now, let me ask you a question. Based on the short evidence that I've given you and some of the historians about Africans and how they rebel against the Muslims because of the way they treated them as unequal. By the way, did you know that the Muslims will not even teach them the Quran or Islam in fear that the Africans will convert to Islam? Thus, now the Muslims have to extend equity to them and give them rights. It's only a few occasions. Like one of them was an African slave who was very loyal to his master. The master gave him the freedom, and he was a king and put him in charge of his army. Well, that's one isolated incident compared to the millions of lives, regardless of what color, the millions of lives that died for their injustice. Remember, there's a pattern. Joseph was sold into slavery by the Ishmaelites, right? Remember that? And the sons of Esau. So there's something about this. It's not no coinkydinky, you follow. So in the Torah, you have now the understanding of a Hebrew servant. Why is it that the laws of the Hebrew servant in Torah are completely different than anywhere else in the world? For protection of honor. In the ancient world, to live in shame was basically like the dead walking. You want to live in honor. So if I am the father and I owe you $500,000 and I'm never going to be able to pay you, I want to protect my honor. And if I have a daughter, I want to protect her honor, and I also want to find her a husband so she will gain protection. Why? Because a woman alone in the ancient world, you have two options, death or prostitution. Right? And the father knew this. So what does he do? In order to pay his debt, he gives his daughter as a servant with the condition that they must come in marriage with the father of the house or the son of the father of the house so she can be protected. Why? Because she has to get three basic needs: food, clothing, and conjugal rights. If the father or the son whoever marries her, does not follow through in that, then she can gain her freedom, and she is not to be sold into slavery, and she is not to be profaned. That's not compared to how the Yazidi women in Iraq, they are taken captive by ISIL. They are raped repeatedly. They are sold into slavery. They are treated as animals, and then they kill them. See, the God that I serve, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he is an equitable Elohim. His Torahs, his commandments, his Torah is righteous and just. His Mishpatim, his judgments are equitable. But he is also a zealous Elohim. So we must understand that when we study the Torah, we are always looking for reasons to doubt about why did the God do that? I mean, for example, when you have a young man who curses his parents, get rid of him. Why does it say death? Because in the commandments, you have the fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother. Why is it there? By the way, it's written in a particular way as an apodictic. You know what apodictic is? Apodictic is a type of legal statement in the form of a command without explanation. Okay? So thus, the Creator says, I want the children to honor your parents. If you curse them, if you hit them, you get rid of them. Why? Because it is a command from the king that you must respect your parents. If you do not do so, it will become an affront to the king of the universe. And that means that if I let one bad apple get away with it, then everybody will do it. And we are here to honor our king. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, when I read the Torah, I'm zealous, I'm excited, I'm passionate. You know why? Because I see, when I read all those ancient documents, I see how equitable and I see how amazing the God of Abraham is. That people like us from the nations will get to know the understanding of the equity of Elohim and understand the differences. And right now, more than ever, ladies and gentlemen, we have a perfect example of injustice, oppression in a religion called Islam. But we also see the righteousness, the justice, and the equity in the lifestyle of a Torah observant person. And I pray that this is a blessing to you. I look forward to see you soon again. Okay, so be blessed. And I just wanted to share with you a little did you know. Shalom to you. We'll see you soon. This is from the Torah Portion Mishpatim.